Okay, guys, so welcome to another episode of the Soccer Performance Podcast. So today we have another guest from Canada. We have Derek Salvador. So we'll get Derek to introduce himself in more detail, but very quickly, Derek, is a soccer fitness coach around the GTA, and he's been doing for many years, and so he'll have a lot of good insights of what he sees and so we'll have a good conversation here. So, Derek, you mind just giving us a little rundown of your background?
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. It's finally nice to sit down and chat with you guys here. So basically, I'm a athletic development coach. I run a small business called Novanta Sports Performance. I work with a number of youth athletes in different sports, primarily in soccer, but we work with athletes in tennis and field hockey and figure skating. So just kind of all over the place. And I also do a little bit of work at a facility called the Hill Academy, which is located in Caledon, which is an athletic or one of these athletic high schools where they just blend academics and athletics, where we primarily work with lacrosse and hockey athletes. Yeah, basically that's me in a nutshell, fellas.
Cool. So, and Derek, you're still with Oakville Soccer Club, or?
Yeah, that's one of our big projects. So working with Oakville Soccer Club, and so I act as the director of sports science and athletic development. So right now, currently, we work with our U12 program all the way up to our U21 League One Reserve program. So we have U12, 13, 14, 15, U17, U19, and U21 at the present moment.
All right, cool. Can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, kind of the breakdown, how you run it at Oakville? Obviously, the U12 program will look a lot different than the U18 program. Do you mind kind of giving us a little breakdown of how that looks and let's say what your vision of what it could be like, if things were to improve, or and of course keep it in with what you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, listen, with everything, we're always trying to improve. Every day, every year. We kind of do a recap and see how things went. Lessons we've learned. Suggestions we've taken from athletes, coaches, technical staff. But ideally, what we've done, this has taken quite a few years to work on, but we've essentially created our athletic development framework. And from there, we've kind of built out our curriculum. And so ideally what we have is within our framework is we have goals. We have KPIs that we want to hit within each of the individual age groups. Now within that is, it's a little bit tricky because, right now we're working with chronological age, but we also have to factor in biological age. We have to factor in training age. But at the younger levels, we tend to focus more on foundational movement skills and also foundational sports skills, right? So basically trying to give athletes, trying to give them tools for their toolbox. And as they progress through that, through their development or through our curriculum, we start to factor in a little bit more of the fundamental movement skill or foundational movement skills. And then also with their foundational key features, right? So trying to look at the sport as a whole, trying to look at athletic development as a whole. And then from there, what are key features that we want to focus on? How does that relate to movement patterns? How do those movement patterns then relate to the movement skills? And then how do those movement skills then relate to sports skills? And then when we look at that, we also try to look at force vectors and how they apply force, and then from all that we then try to create activities or programs then that best exemplify that, and will give the athletes the best opportunity to learn about movement variability, to express movement in a bunch of different contexts with different modalities within different planes. How do we challenge the spine within that? So once we kind of have that general understanding, that general idea, and then from there we kind of create the training sessions that we feel then will help maximize that potential, right? So it's so at the younger age groups, it's a lot of play, right? It's a lot of, this is where we struggle sometimes because sometimes the coaches want us to give a lot of instruction, where at the younger age groups we tend to hold back from that, and we let them kind of do a lot more self-exploration, learning by trying, learning by doing, learning from others within the group. And then as we start to get a little bit older, then we start to add a little bit more structure to it. right? So our key features, so you probably heard me say that a few times. Key features refers mostly to what the shoulder, what the knees, and what the ankles are doing. All right, and then how we relate to that, and then from there, how do we express that within our movement patterns, and then so forth and so forth. So I just said a lot there. I don't know if that's a good enough answer. I could keep going, but I think we'd be here all day if I did.
No,
No, it
I
was good.
and quick
Yeah, go ahead.
point, on your comment there regarding the younger ages, and it just resonated with me because we have kind of a terminology that we call like disguised training with a lot of our younger players, and I find that the engagement is not always there when you try to coach too much with them, and so it takes away from intensity. It takes away from it takes away from the way that they approach the exercise. So it's funny that you said that. It really made me think about different strategies, because I think that's where the challenge lies, right? How do you implement these quote unquote complex things to young players, right? And so maybe we can talk about that. What are your challenges? Because just like Mario and I mean, pro players are great, but the reality is the majority of our demographic clientele is going to be raw, inexperienced young athletes, right? So how do you go about dealing with those type of athletes, Derek?
Yeah, we're still trying to figure that out. But the big thing is that what I found with the younger age groups is when I first started in this space, I would try to do a lot of coaching. And then I realized that their attention span is very, very small. And so from there, it's like, okay, how can I get across what I need them to do or what I need them to express with as minimal instruction as possible, right? And meaning, what I mean by that is time. I don't want them sitting around for 30 seconds, 45 seconds listening to me, go on and on about certain things, where I could just say, okay, you know what, maybe the way I structure the activity, right, will allow them to then kind of almost, and when I say by self-explore, they kind of almost discover the things that we're having them look for, or maybe it's just one thing I'm going to have them focus on, right? So they're performing an exercise, maybe they're doing 3 or 4 things that I'd like for them to improve on, but instead of trying to correct all 3 or 4 things, we just pick one. So there's going to be one focus for today's training session, and we're just going to focus on that one point, right? Or sometimes it's like, okay, you know what? It's a little bit of an assessment for us. Let's have them perform a certain activity and then see what we discover, right? If we see within the group that they're all struggling at one specific thing, then we're going to target that one specific thing, and that's it. Maybe that one specific thing is going to then help a bunch of others, right? So it's just minimal instruction, but I guess it's also how we create the environment, so that way, like there's very, very little standing still. Because like I said, with the younger, like we're dealing with 12-year-olds, so we have an hour with these kids, right? And so we have to keep them moving. We have to keep them moving, right? So it's finding activities that's going to keep them engaged. And like you said, disguised training, like, yeah, instead of it being a very formal training session, is we're going to do certain activities where they're going to get some of those movements in, right? So we play a lot of games with them. There's one that's really popular. Like, okay, so if you're talking, say, agility, for example, I could set up some cones and have them do all these certain movements and try and coach them about, sitting low through their hips and, making sure their knees are in line with their hips and toes when they do this. Or we just play cat and mouse. And you know what? They're going to chase each other around the gym. And, they're going to have to get into these positions. And at that younger age group, maybe I just want them getting exposure to that. And then as we get older, we can break that down when their attention spans a little bit, a little bit longer and stuff. But those are some of the strategies that we've used. The way we structure our warm up, what I mean? Instead of it being, a warm up, it becomes more like, hey, we're just going to do some activities, and that's it. Hey, try this, guys, and see what happens. Hey, girls, try this and see what happens. You're not good at it. That's okay. It doesn't matter to us. Just try it and see what happens. And then from there, you see the learning start to happen. You see they kind of coach each other. They help each other out. And then little by little, as they continue to develop along that pathway, they start to clue in. They start to get the cues that we're looking for, and so forth. So yeah, those are some simple things that we've done over time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, just thinking about what you were saying, I find at least the motivation for younger players tends to be external for a large period of time, right? It's always, as soon as I get you competing versus somebody else, now your brain goes like, okay, I'm not losing, right? Versus older players who then start to develop kind of like an internal sense of motivation and drive where I don't need to necessarily compete against somebody to give my max effort, right? And so I think those games are really important when you're trying to approach, let's say, like you were saying, for example, a change of direction. If I'm jogging into a certain change of direction, it's not really going to mimic the demand of the game. And so
Mhm.
I could do a change of direction drill, right? And not get the benefit of that drill. Or like you were saying, I could do a race where they have to change direction by the way that I structure the race. And just because they're competing, they're going to give me a bit more output. They're going to give me more. So I think it's a good point for coaches too to understand how to adapt. And I just bring that up because I think that, like I said, the pros and all the fancy stuff is nice, but the challenges lie, I think, with younger players, right? What do you think about that, Mayor?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it kind of just made me real think about kind of when you said the demands of the game and training for the game. And Derek and I had a conversation in the past where we found that a lot of teams when they train, a lot of coaches sessions, the intensity is just not high enough. And it's not requesting enough from the players. So in a way that could be attention span. Is the session not stimulating enough? Two, the physical demands of the game. Are they covering getting a lot of change of directions, high speed running as they would in the game to prepare them for that? And that gives a physical stimulus as well. And then of course the tempo of the game. You're playing at a high intensity, you're playing at a high tempo, you will perform well in the game. So Derek, I remember we spoke about stuff like that. Can you tell us a little bit kind of what you see and maybe elaborate on that, and kind of, I know you have ways to track that and give the feedback. I think that could bring a lot of good insight.
Yeah, I think what's really important, guys, is why we dropped down to U12. Because before we used to just start at U13, right? So with Oakville, we're part of the OPDL program. And so we started there. And what I've seen over time, because I've been with them now for almost 10 years. So some trends that I've seen over time is just that the level of athleticism, just general athleticism, is not what it once was, right? And so I don't know if it's just from, spending more time on the phone or spending more time on the iPad or not getting enough stimulus at school. It's not where it once was. And so we felt by dropping down to the U12 group, we can actually start to establish some good habits there. And I think that's the big thing, is the habits piece. So when we would start with our U13s, it would take us, no word of a lie, maybe a good 4 months before we could almost calm the players down to where they understood, what was expected of them within the session. Now that we start at U12, we set the expectation very early, and we found that transition now to U13 to be much easier now, where that when we show up for a session, the players right away know exactly what they have to do and what's expected of them, right? And so I think that's the first and foremost, is starting to create that culture of what our expectations are and what we're looking for and what we're demanding within our session, right? And so I think that's been a big help. So one is creating that culture, and then two, for us, the other big thing is this stemmed from a conversation I had years ago with a coach, and this was, I don't even remember where this was, but the coach said to me, hey Derek, you need to run my players more. And I said, okay, well, why am I running? Like, why do I need to run your players? Like, I get 45 minutes a week with them. There's a lot of stuff that we have to work on, you know. So what's the reasoning behind it? I need to know the why first. So it's like, okay, we play a very high tempo game. I want to play a high tempo game with my players. And I find that, for the first 60 minutes, they can execute, and then there's a massive drop off, right? And I'm like, okay, so again, going back to what I said, I only get 45 minutes a week with your players. How is that going to change what it is that you're doing? I think the first thing we have to ask is, what are you doing within your session, right? That is going to try and get the same output that you're looking for within your matches. So we all know this. You have to train the way you want to play. So what is your game model like? And then how do you set up your training in order to execute? Right. So then we're watching the training sessions afterwards, and it's very low intensity drills that are drawn out. So now instead of it being, maybe a 20-minute activity where you have, 3 blocks of 5 minutes with a 2-minute rest. And, within your 2 minutes, you provide your instructions, but then you let the players go. All of a sudden now you're turning it into one long 20-minute continuous activity where all of a sudden the tempo drops way down because the way you've spaced out the activity is too big. The players can't keep up those high intensity actions. And then all of a sudden now everything starts to slow down. So then I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, okay, well, now you can see why, all of a sudden now your players aren't executing in a match the way you want to. So the way we're kind of addressing it now is this past year we used, so I'm also an assistant coach with our U17 girls team. And what myself and the head coach set out to do is we're like, okay, so we got GPS involved this year, and we had all our players wear their units for training and for matches. And really within the first year, all we were doing is trying to collect as much data as we could and just kind of basically trying to tell us what is the data telling us. And then, so this year I reached out to the University of Toronto and I brought in a research student and basically said, hey, here's all our numbers. Here's what we're looking for. This is what we want our reports to look like. What can you start to tell us? And by there, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to look at, okay, what are the demands of the game? And then how do we structure our training microcycle in order to meet those physiological demands, right? So again, training the way we want to play, right? And then from there, it's just having to understand, okay, what did match day -4 look like? What did match day -2 look like? What did match day -1 look like? Right? So we have our main principles, right? So if we think about tactical periodization, we look at our principles, right? So we're looking at, say we're looking at attacking transition, we're looking at defending, we're looking at defensive transition, right? So that will be this main focus. And then within each of those training days, we'll have our sub focus. So whether it's an intensive day, an extensive day, whether we're going to look at a speed day, whether it's going to be reaction day. And then we kind of look to structure training around that. And so now the goal for us now is that now that we have a year's worth of data is now we want to try and use this data to now start educating our coaches, right? So now from an athletic development coach, here's the things I want to work on, and here's the things that I think I can be very beneficial, where my services or my abilities come into play, where it would be very, very beneficial for the athletes, and then getting away from fitness where we're just doing tons of running for the sake of just doing tons of running, where now they can get that fitness by actually playing the game and structuring it so that way the game is doing all the teaching. The game is handling the physiological components that we're looking for, right? So I think it's like a relationship between us and the sport coaches. Is just saying, hey, here's some tools that you guys can use to now kind of bring those numbers up, to bring that intensity up. So that way now, like you said, so now training has purpose behind it, right? So there shouldn't be lots of standing around. We should have everything timed, all our blocks ready, and then we execute. So yeah, these are some of the projects that we're working on right now.
Cool. Juan, you wanted to add anything to that, or have any questions?
I think it's great, and it's funny that we talk about that all the time, and it's starting to become popular, the tracking methods, and especially GPS trackers. And I think it's because they see a lot of players, finish a game and then they have their little the little vest and looks professional. But I think players can understand that it doesn't need to be so glorified, right? Like I have a lot of parents in this scenario where they'll come in and say, hey, my kid needs to get fast. Kind of exercises do they need to do? What should I buy this tracker? Should I buy, you know what I mean? And I know there's a lot of confusion, but I think it's important to just recap that point with the fact that, these trackers are truly there to expose, right, what it is that we're trying to improve. So if the tracker is giving us information, right, I think players need to understand that you really have to be self-aware, take the values that you're getting if you have the resources, and then what do you do with those values, right? Because again, they're just numbers. So if you're not really using those numbers, what's the point of those trackers? So I wanted to ask you, when you collect the data, and you obviously are going to get findings, how do you guys go about feeding that back to the players, right? Because it can be sometimes discouraging to say, hey, look, this is the average, right? This is where you are. How do you guys go about dealing with the, I guess, call it the social aspect or the mental aspect of how you address those things?
Yeah, the first thing we tell them is that there's no judgment. There's no judgment. Really, it's information for us coaches. It's for us to ensure that we are meeting the demands every week with how we structure training, right? And so this is the thing. Even the message we've given to the parents is that, listen, we're not using any of these numbers to judge. It's not going to affect playing time. It's not, it really, it's just for us coaches to become better at what we're doing, and to ensure that we're structuring training in a way that we're hitting all the necessary numbers that we need to hit. The only time it's ever come into a conversation is that we noticed one of our players once that during a game, their sprint numbers were very low. But then in training, they were very high. And it's like, okay, that's usually it's kind of the other way around. And so our conversation is like, hey, what's going on? And the athlete would say, listen, like I'm trying to make myself last in the game, right? I want to stay out there for as long as I can. So I'm trying to pace myself. And then, our conversation then was, well, listen, some of the things that we need you to do on the field, you're not doing it because of the strategy that you're using, right? And so it's like all of a sudden now it's, okay, we need to change that because we know you can hit those numbers. We've seen it in training, but you're not doing it in the match. And then we're like, if you find that you're fatiguing or you're getting tired, then that's us, our job as coaches to recognize that and then make the substitution as we see fit. Right. And so that was the only time we've ever done that with a player. And something clicked. They're like, okay, that makes sense to me now. Right. And then all of a sudden it changed. We started seeing their numbers go up. But regardless of what the GPS is saying, it's what we see now in the matches, right? And so that's something else we had a conversation with. We did a presentation for our coaches about a month ago, and we also had people from Canada Soccer and from Ontario Soccer there just to observe and stuff. And one of the things that we wanted to ensure was that we're not using these numbers to dictate what's going on in the field. Right. Everything that we design in training, everything that we do on the field is done for the purpose of learning. It's done for the purpose of improving our team, improving our game model in which the way we play soccer. And these numbers now are used to help us to inform us on what we need to do next. Right. And so that's the big thing. And I know sometimes, we don't have the live option. That's well beyond my budget. So basically, we have to review everything afterwards, and sometimes that's a good thing because sometimes you see people with live, and it's like they're so busy staring at an iPad that they're completely ignoring what's going on the field, right? And I think that has an adverse effect. And then I can see why sometimes there's that battle where there's the football side and the sports science side, and they're kind of butting heads. Where I'm like, no, let you guys do what you need to do on the field. And then we'll review it afterwards and we'll give you the feedback on what you can do to improve or whether or not what you did was appropriate or what you can change now in order to, create a different type of stimulus and stuff. So, and then within this presentation, we had a parent that just said, hey, listen, can I put a tracker on my 12-year-old and then you use all the information, right? And I'm like, well, first off, I don't know what I'm going to use that information for. So that's the first question is if you're going to use tech or you're going to use data, you have to understand, like, what am I going to use it for? And if you can't come up with a good enough reason, then there's no point in doing it. Right. And so the thing is, and even at like 12 or 13, like I could put a tracker on you, but here's the thing, like there's so many other things that we need to work on that, like that stuff is like so irrelevant to me and stuff. Right. So with us, when we're doing this at the U17 level. Right. So then after that, these players go into League One. So now and some of them are getting ready to go off to school. They're starting to look at universities and stuff. They're starting to look at that next level. Right. And so for now, it's like we got to make sure that, we're preparing them as best we can. But the younger age groups, there's so many other, I guess they say, the low bearing fruit, all those different fruits that you can grab first. There's so much more that there's a lot more relevance to. And so those are some of the strategies that we've used with data, but we try to make sure that we don't let the kids get hung up on it and stuff. So.
Yeah, good. And that kind of goes back, and I think you mentioned it briefly in the very beginning, training age versus chronological age versus biological age. And, I guess parents and maybe even coaches kind of sometimes think they have the younger players and they think they need this, kind of training where the older players would do. So they're looking at something, let's say a player with a higher training age, they want to put that with these younger players, but it doesn't work. And then of course at that U12, you know what I mean? It should be all like maximizing as much as you can, technical development and so forth. And so with that, you mentioned before, you kind of look at with your players' biological age versus chronological age. Can you tell us a little bit about the biological age difference versus chronological age? Because I think that might go past a lot of coaches' heads, and I think it's can be misunderstood, and I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, the big thing is so chronological age is where you fall along the calendar, right? And so, if you're born, March 1st, 2010, then you are a 13-year-old. I think I did my math correct. Yes, you're a 13-year-old. But then biologically, your body may present like someone who's 16 years old. Or a kid on the same team may have their body where they present more like a 9-year-old, right? And so that's the big one. Like between 12, 13, and 14, we just see like all these different heights and stuff and all these different builds. You see the U13 kid who's just an absolute man child and just manhandling kids on the field. And right away, they get all this praise, right? Because physically, they can dominate. And then you have the other kid who's a little bit slower, a little bit weaker, but technically very gifted. And they often get ignored because coaches feel like they're going to get pushed around. They don't have the physicality to handle the game. So then the bigger, stronger kid gets all the recognition while the smaller technical kid gets pushed off to the side. And maybe after 3 years, that one child, the one child who's like, the little technical wizard, all of a sudden they mature a little bit. And that one child who is the man, who's just manhandling everybody, that's it. They're not growing much more. And then all of a sudden now you start to see this shift where, the kid that, really relied on a lot of their physicality just can't do it anymore because those tools have been taken away because everyone is just as physical, but they haven't developed the technical skill, right? And now the kid who's developed the technical skill, he's now starting to excel. But where we run into the problem is that because we gave up on that kid so early, he's kind of just been left, to just, do his own thing. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to, develop some methods, and all the information is out there, right? You can search this all up. It's not like we haven't invented anything new, but trying to use some of this information where now we can start to identify early developers and start to identify late developers, and then trying to pass this information on to our technical staff and also to our coaching staff where, hey, this kid is really amazing physically, but in order to continue to develop his technical ability, we may have to push him a couple age groups up for training, just so he can continue. So now he can't rely on those physical skills as much, and he'll be forced to develop his technical. And then with our other kid, who's one of the smaller ones, is, let's keep an eye on him, or maybe drop them down to a lower age group where now they can continue to, express themselves so that way they don't become frustrated, right? Now, within Europe, this works really well, right? You see it like places like at Southampton and West Ham United, they're actually doing this kind of stuff. So bio-banding, right? And you have an academy structure and you can move players up and down. Where here in Canada, we have to pay to play, right? And so all of a sudden, how do I tell a parent, hey, they need to drop down a couple age groups? And it's like, whoa, hold on a second. My child is doing this and I've paid for this. And how are you telling me this? And why are we doing that? So it's a work in progress. We're also trying to develop these critical growth periods, like understand them a little bit better, so that when we start to have some of these growth-related injuries, we can let parents, be aware that, or even coaches be aware. Be patient with this kid; they're just going through their growth spurt. And again, this is more research that we're doing on this side as well. So those are some. Hopefully, that answers your question. But these are some of the things that we're starting to really be better at understanding and stuff. So that way, we can create the better, the training environment that suits each individual, right, within a team environment, which can be really problematic at times.
That's a great point. I think, and you know what, you touched the point that we could probably have a full second conversation on, which is now the actual delivery of how do you address a player who, like you said, is paying to play, right? May take the approach where it's like, well, I don't want to fall behind if you're asking me to go down 2 years, or, oh, it's not fair that so and so is going up. But if you look at a professional academy, it's truly the only way, right? It's the only way to get a player to consistently have a challenge or be in a challenge that is suitable for his or her level, is to be able to move up and down a certain scale to find that right spot. And I think if we can shed some light to that unfortunately, I think our culture is going towards a a very fragile mentality where it's, you know, if I'm not playing a certain time, then I can just get my mom or dad to talk to the coach, and that coach will go and fight my battle for me. And if I'm not on the A team, then my mom and dad will come in and, you know, they can have a conversation as to why they think I should be on the A team. And I think it's so important to kind of wrap up that players need to, number one, or families, players and parents need to really assess them, or assess the level of their player or of their son or daughter, in a very self-aware form, because I think the key is being able to identify where you are and what you need to improve, so that you're not improving qualities that are not even relevant to you. Maybe your speed is great, right? But like you said, your technical ability is not there. So this path is for a player who has those qualities. Another player might have different qualities. This path is for them. And like you said, at the top, we all meet, right? It's really irrelevant if you're peaking at 12, 13. If come 18 to 20, there's no peak, right? So I think it's so important. I love the fact that you touched upon the systems, and it goes back to that. I think culturally we have to do better at creating a mentality that's more professional for the benefit of these players that want to be professional players, right?
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. It's very frustrating at times because there's times where even on a team you can see it. There's maybe 4 or 5 kids that are really dialed in, and then there's some that are just there because they're being told they have to, or it's more of a social thing, right? So to me, what it really comes down to at the end of the day is you're setting your expectations. We hear words like high performance a lot and stuff, and to me, high performance is more of a like it's setting those standards. It's a mentality, right? And you know what I mean? And what's hard is as a coach, sometimes like, oh, they're kids, I get it. And you know what? Yeah, they are kids, but you set the expectation and they have to get there. Not the other way around where it's like, okay, you know what, we're gonna bring it down. And no, it doesn't work like that, because you know what, life doesn't work like that. You think about our professions and what we're all trying to achieve and different things that we do. Like, we hold ourselves very, very high, right? And we have to, because if not, we're going to get left behind. Competitors are going to come in, other coaches are going to come in. So we've got to make sure that we maintain a very, very high standard, and you know what, and that everyone's executing to that, right? And if not, then really, what are we doing then? Right? If we're really trying to, change the mentality and be a little bit more professional, we have to hold everybody accountable, including ourselves, right? We can't take any off days, right? So it's a work in progress. I've seen things improve over the years. It's going to continue to be a work in progress, but you know what? Hopefully, I think we're all on the right path and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree. Mary, you want to wrap up the episode?
Yeah, cool. I guess just touch on that point, Juan, when you said, who cares if the player peaks at 12, 13? It just reminded me of a conversation I had with some coaches of working in under 11, under 12, and they were saying how, oh, they really want to win the league next year, so they want fitness training to like really up their game and this and that. And I'm thinking, guys, they're 11. What's your training like? Are you teaching them to play? Are you working like? Are you maximizing each training session, that hour of, maximizing technical development? I mean, I think there's a lot more education that still needs to be there. And, but yeah, just want to make that point. So about a minute to go. Derek, thank you for coming on. So Novanta Sports Performance, where can they find you if players are interested?
Yeah, you can find us on social media. I'm not the best at it. I try, but we're on social media at Novanta SP, I believe it's called. Even that terrible, I don't even know our own handle and stuff. But or you can check out our website, which is www.novantasportsperformance.com. You can check us out there and stuff. We have some exciting stuff that's coming up in the next couple months. But yeah, so you can find us there and stuff. And we train out of the train out of Oakville. We have a facility that we use there, and yeah, that's us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Derek, again for coming on to chat with us and for giving us your time. And I'm sure we got a second conversation lined up sometime soon.
Awesome. Thanks, fellas. I really appreciate being on your show and stuff. Okay, keep up the good work. You guys are doing good things. All right.
Thanks, Derek. Talk soon. Boys, all the best.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. See you
Take
guys.
care.
You guys.
Bye, folks. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.